Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. GRM Adrian here. Welcome back to the channel. Folks, we've got a great video for you guys today. I'm sure you've all heard the news. Lord of the Rings is getting a brand new game by Athlon Games. And you guys have probably seen that video. And I have a special guest here that we're going to be talking to and interviewing and just nerding out over this new Lord of the Rings game, in addition to talking about the Lord of the Rings Online later on in the video as well. So this is a mini roundtable discussion video, and my guest, of course, is none other than Andang. Andang, for those of you guys that know him, awesome. And for those of you that don't, he's a Lord of the Rings Online content creator right here on YouTube and the founder of LOTR Players News. Hello, Andang.
Hey, how's it going?
Going good. How you doing, man?
Doing good. Happy to be here.
So, where else are we going to start but with that new game announced by Athlon Games and Leu Technology? And you've got your video on this. You released a video on this as well. And I think it's safe to say that, you know, both of us being LOTR players and being fans of Lord of the Rings and Tolkien, we're really excited about this. So I want to get, Andang, your initial impressions and reactions when you heard this news.
Well, my initial impressions, I should give a little bit of background first. I'm ready for something new with LOTR. I'm kind of getting tired of the current Lord of the Rings MMO. Just because it's, you know, the same exact gameplay, the same exact things. The story's still good, and that's the main reason I play it. And so my initial impressions for this was, yes, something new, something that's not Shadow of War, that's completely lore breaking potentially. We hope. There's now a potential hope there. And, you know, it's just something new, another chance for a potential good, great game. And so that was just kind of my initial reaction, is that I'm excited, but also kind of hesitant, you know, wanting to make sure that they, wanting to learn more before I get too excited about it, so.
Right, and that's the thing. We've got that news release, and there's a lot of vague information out there, and this is, you know, I think pretty natural for companies and studios that are just announcing a game. And because it is Lord of the Rings, it's a big IP, so it's going to garner all that initial hype. But, you know, compared to other games, this is just out there. And I think, I mean, my initial impressions are almost exactly like yours, having played the Lord of the Rings for so long, and we've all been used to, you know, Turbine and Standing Stone Games' version of a Middle-earth Online, an MMORPG set in that world and in that age, following that One Ring saga. So being given this hint, you know, this tease, this big tease about this new game that we don't even know is going to be an MMORPG. I mean, it's exciting, but at the same time, yeah, cautiously optimistic. So expectations, I mean, before we get on to that next point, anything you want to add about, you know, what you've seen or read on the press release by Leu Tech or by Athlon Games? And are you hoping for it to be an MMORPG, or are you just going to take whatever that comes? Like, what are you really expecting out of this?
Yeah, so I am hoping that it's an MMORPG. Just as some more of my initial reactions, I also think that this is their response to the whole Amazon thing. Not necessarily a cooperation, but maybe Middle-earth Enterprises, I don't know if they maybe reached out to companies and like, hey, Amazon's making this thing that's going against us. We kind of need a thing because we're like the Lord of the Rings guys. We're named Middle-earth Enterprises, and we're not in charge of or even related to this TV series. So we kind of need something taking place before the Lord of the Rings ourselves.
Right.
At least that's kind of my thought, is that maybe Middle-earth Enterprises reached out. I'd be very interested to figure out who reached out to who here. And how this all came about, because I think it's very interesting that it's also something taking place before the events of the Lord of the Rings, but it's not in any way related to the Amazon series, because Amazon's getting their rights from a completely different source, so they're not in any way tied together, which is really interesting. I'm wondering how all this came about.
That's a good point, and you know, from a neutral perspective, I would think that, you know, related or not, because of the same IP, it's almost like a no-brainer to take advantage of that sort of, you know, announcement that we are getting a TV show. So I think announcing that game with the news and the knowledge that the TV show is going to be coming out, I think it's a pretty good move. I would think good timing, as I said in my video. And about your point about how this came about, Holy Order of Dragons, who commented on the video, posted a link in there of a interview, and the person in charge here for Athlon Games who got the ball rolling is a guy called Dave Miller, I think it was, and he apparently
Yeah.
was part of the Codemasters team for Lord of the Rings Online back in the day, and he was part of WB too. So that could be a connection there. I'm not sure, but if that would make sense, I think,
Yeah, I saw
about
that as
why.
well. There's definitely some type of collaboration going on. So um,
y-
that
Yeah,
also kind of made me more scared that he was a WB guy at some point as well. But
right. It's a double-edged sword there. On one hand, you have a person who has been involved with the Lord of the Rings online MMORPG, and at the same time, they were part of WB and Codemasters. Although, both of us, we play on the North American servers, so Codemasters was for EU, so we don't actually know if Codemasters were, you know, did their jobs well or were competent, whatever. I can't say because I don't know, honestly.
so here's another question I have for you. Do you think that this MMO would be happening if the Amazon TV series had never been announced?
No.
I agree.
That's
I don't
yeah,
think it would
that's
either.
there was for a very long time before the Amazon TV show was announced, we saw Lord of the Rings got some sort of like a mini resurgence, Lord of the Rings way back in 2007, and then all these Shadow of Mordor games come out, and it still wasn't enough to bring the franchise back on another level, like maybe the Hobbit movies did, like how Peter Jackson did, and there wasn't any follow up to that. So yeah, if the Amazon TV show didn't announce itself and go out of its way to be different in the sense that we're looking at a different uh, uh, storyline and places and people from Peter Jackson's version, that itself has got a lot of people talking already. So yeah, I think without that TV show, we wouldn't be getting this game, I suppose.
Yeah, so exciting. Good time to be a Tolkien fan, I guess, now that we're getting an MMO and a TV series. So who
Right.
knows what else will come out of this? It's exciting.
Exactly. Let's sticking with the expectations and speculations thing, dude. If what happens, and this is totally speculation here, what happens if it's not an MMO? Like we all have probably read that release, and they took a lot of care not to mention MMORPG. Not sure because they are fully aware that Standing Stone Games has their version by with Daybreak as publisher still out, so they didn't want to insert that keyword there just to stir stuff up. And it just says online game on the release. So what happens if it's a mobile game, a mobile MMO, or if it's another single player co-op game, maybe in the style of Warframe, which is a game that they're related to, Digital Extremes, the studio, under Lay Technologies. What happens then? Will you still be as excited, or would you just go, hopes and dreams gone?
I think that I'd still be excited. I think it'd be nice to see just something different. That's kind of what I'm looking for, is something different in the Lord of the Rings space, in the Lord of
Right.
the Rings game space. I would like to see an MMO of some type. It also doesn't necessarily, even if we do get a massively multiplayer online game, doesn't necessarily mean it'll be an RPG. It could be an action game or something like
Right.
that. So it's very interesting. I don't think it'll be a mobile game. I've seen that thrown along quite a bit. I don't know why in the world they would mention PC and console in their press release
Right.
if it was a mobile game. So I think that we're pretty secure thinking that it'll be a AAA game, because they do mention that quite a bit as well. So
Agreed. And
luckily, there's at least that reassurance that it won't be just a mobile game.
yeah, so I think we can safely scratch mobile game off that list. And to be fair, honestly, I think both of us we're gonna be biased towards the MMORPG genre because that's who we are. We're MMORPG players, and obviously we'd love to see a new MMO, not just because of our affiliation with LOTR over the years, and just wanting to see a better version or an updated version, whatever. Just we just like to see an MMO. But if it happens to be a game similar to Shadow of Mordor, and this is where I love that I get to talk to you about this because I delved into Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War when they both came out, especially the first one, Shadow of Mordor, being this game that follows a completely made up character that brings back iconic characters, but puts them in a different light and all that stuff. And I played it for a bit. The lore didn't really capture me the way I thought it would. But you've played these games and you've live streamed them. You've got videos about them. You got videos about the lore. Um, what would you say if this new game by Avalon Games comes out and it's trying to get into that Shadow of War kind of market? Is that good idea or not? Or did you just leave this Shadow of War style of games alone and let WB just handle that?
I would be okay if it's like Shadow of Mordor. I would not be okay if it's like Shadow of War.
Okay.
I could not. There was a way more lore breaking I feel like going on in Shadow of War than there even was in Shadow of Mordor. So if you had
Right.
issue with the lore in Shadow of Mordor, don't play Shadow of War. Just stay away. Run the other direction because I had a big issue with the lore there. I think as if it was gameplay wise somehow related to that, I wouldn't have an issue with that. As
Gotcha.
long as they don't do the crazy siege system where you have to do that 20 times just to get to a cinematic. As long as they don't have any
Right.
frustrating grinds like that, I'll be happy.
Awesome. You just brought up like two things that I was going to talk about in this video as well. First of all, the lore, and then second of all, the grind. We'll start with the lore part there because that's interesting. And uh, Lord of the Rings fans, Tolkien fans are some of the most loyal and for lack of a better word, protective people about this franchise that they love so much. About this source material that everybody uh, just cherishes. And over the years, there's been games coming out that have tried to do something different. I mean, they've always respected the lore. I get a feel like when you talk about games like Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War, Lord of the Rings Online. What's that other game on Steam? It's a party-based game. I can't remember. War in the North, and
Yep.
there's a couple more. I felt like they always tried to be respectful to the lore, but at the same time, they've always tried to inject something in just to keep things interesting and fresh. So if if this new game, kind of what's the boundary for you, or what's the line? Should they be by the book, or are you okay with them experimenting here? Because it is going to be completely, well, not completely, because we were talking about this before we started recording, which is, the release stated that it's not going to be so far back, like at the beginning of the first age or anything. It's going to be leading up into the Lord of the Rings, third age, One Ring saga. So depending on the timeline, what's where do you draw the line in the sand? If they do break the lore, would you still play it out of pure excitement just to see something new, or do you want them to stay by the book as much as possible?
So I love Volume 1 in The Lord of the Rings Online. That's an awesome story. I know some people that think that that is completely lore breaking and it shouldn't exist because Angmar wasn't rising then and things like that. It makes it seem much more dangerous in Eriador than it maybe was and things like that. But I feel like that you definitely have to change the lore, especially if you're making an MMO, just to be able to fit in the player in there somewhere.
Gotcha.
Because Lord of the Rings, every story for the most part has the heroes already established, and then there's just like the background soldiers and things. Well, you can flesh out the background soldiers and things, or adventures, journeys that might tie in somehow, or things like that. And so I'd much rather them not stay away from the lore, but instead make up their own stories for this own adventure, and then also tie in the lore where it's appropriate. Have the player line up with the story, kind of like it does in The Lord of the Rings Online. I think
Right.
they do a great job of capturing the spirit of Tolkien, as far as
Agreed.
like what type of stories he's trying to tell, and they've done a really good job in telling their own stories that are in that same style. And I feel like as long as you don't contradict the lore and make up something that completely just could not happen, like in Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War, I feel like I'm much, much more okay with it if it was something like War in the North or The Lord of the Rings Online, where they tell their own stories that are, wholly original and completely made up, but they're in that style of Tolkien and, respecting the lore and things like that.
Yeah, great point. I personally feel that there has to be a good balance to the two. Stick with, especially the fundamental stuff that Tolkien writes about, and in a deeper sense, the values and the beliefs of these characters in this world. Those things has to stay true, I feel, because when you look at the larger picture of these stories, you look at some of the themes and the values and all that stuff that has to be lore appropriate. And if it deviates away from that, I think a lot of people will immediately feel like, yeah, this, I'm just not feeling this. This doesn't feel like Middle Earth to me. At the same time, when it comes to, like as you were saying, individually crafted stories that we haven't seen before, I agree. I would like them to go, beyond the conventional. And when you talked about Lord of the Rings, there, like in my video, I've had lots of comments talking about the lore breaking effect that LOTR's had over the years with the Rune Keeper and a whole bunch more that we could talk about all day. We're not going to. They've
Thankfully.
they've done what they can to keep things fresh. And I think, as players now, we have to sort of understand where we are in terms of a gaming community and the market and the audience that these guys have to cater for. If they come up with a game that is solely trying to please the fan base that are super loyal and want authentic stuff, I have to be very honest and say there's not going to be it's not going to cater for everyone. Whereas you'll look at Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War, those games, they are kind of more open and more accessible to a lot of players, because, yeah, the name sells. It is a Lord of the Rings game, and not a lot of people care about the lore as much. And I know it's controversial saying that, but I think just to be more accessible, I think this developer should, keep a good balance of having a fun game and at the same time following the books or following the source material where they can, but deviating just to keep it fresh and fun. So that's my 2 cents.
One thing that I thought about recently is that Shadow of Mordor and Shadow of War also leading up to the events of the Lord of the Rings. they
Right.
also brought that up when they were talking about it. So they can completely make up their own story entirely, or they can go off of stuff that's actually taking place in the events leading up to the Lord of the Rings. And so it'll be interesting to see how they strike that balance. And the time place before the books, there's much more room to make up your own stories than there is once you start getting involved in them. So I think that they have an advantage there where they'll be able to make more of their own stories that way.
They have an advantage and they have a challenge to
Yes.
sell that part. A lot of people will be it's just human nature. What would a movie about Aragorn the King sell more tickets, or the king before that? So they have to strike up this thing, and I wish them all the best. Honestly, it's a fun challenge. If I was a part of a gaming studio that's working on this project, I think brainstorming when, how, what, where is so awesome, and awesome to geek out in that studio just to think about all the possibilities.
Well, that's actually one thing that surprised me, is that Warner Brothers has rights to The Lord of the Rings to make movies about The Lord of the Rings. And yet I don't think they realize just how many other stories they could be telling as like
Right.
Adventures of Young Aragorn and things like that people would pay to go see for sure. At least
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings fans. And yet we haven't seen them, due to Lord of the Rings, like what they're doing to Star Wars, where they're making like,
Oh.
these standalone stories and things like that. So
To
it'll
be
be interesting
fair,
to see
though-
if this Amazon series causes Warner Brothers to maybe make their own movies that are not just
Yeah,
the main Lord of the Rings and Hobbit.
I would love that. And we're going slightly off topic here, but I do want to talk about that. Star Wars, a completely different fandom, and what Disney's kind of doing with Star Wars by cranking out a movie every year is kind of split people or split the fans into two groups. You either like the new direction or you don't. And you're a Star Wars fan?
Yeah,
Do you like the the new direction of the movies and their new method of just shoving out movies every chance they get?
I like the standalone films so far. I don't necessarily like Episode 8 in particular.
Gotcha.
Really did
Yeah, I
not like
mean,
that story. The plot line of running out of gas was not my go-to Star Wars story. So
right. I hear you. Yeah, standalone films. Rogue One is just, oh man, I
yeah.
can't get over it. But my where I was going with that is, uh, Star Wars kind of what made the movie special was the first three movies came out before we were born, and then we started getting to it, and then the prequels came out, and there's always a long period. Th that long period of just mystery and the gaps in between, and just you got all those cartoons coming out. I don't know, but having a Star Wars movie every year just kind of desensitizes people a lot, and the kind of stories that they're trying to tell, some of them don't need to be told. I would rather them just be this guy became who he is, Han Solo specifically. Talking, I would rather not know how he got his name Solo. I mean, that kind of stuff just doesn't need to be
Yeah.
shown to public. So from a Lord of the Rings perspective, if they were cranking out a movie every year, and there's just so many storylines they can pick from, and so many different events that they can pick from, and if they made a meal out of everything, if they made this one short event into like a movie and all this stuff, I think over this period of 10, 20 years, a lot of people would just I mean, as Tolkien fans, we'd all be like, awesome, we've got more stuff to add to the collection, more stuff to nerd out and watch. But I think it will have some sort of a negative effect over time. I don't know, it's a hunch feeling looking at how Star Wars is going.
Yeah, they don't have to do it every year. But if they had
Yeah,
like a team working on movies, like every 3 years or, a normal pace, I think that they could be making quite a bit more money that way, and we'd be getting Lord of the Rings films. So
agreed. Um, all right, so going back to this new Lord of the Rings game by Athlon Games, where I touched on a topic there that Andang brought up, which was lore. Now, he also talked about something related to this new game, and we were talking about grind earlier on, and how Shadow of War was grindy. So I counted the comments here, and there's over 15 of you that have specifically said that you fear that this is going to be a pay to win game. And just to address this real quick, there's so many definitions of pay to win. I've played a bunch of MMOs. I've seen a lot of microtransaction and payment models for these games. Free to play doesn't always translate to pay to win. The developers will have to make money somewhere. And at this point, so early in the development process for this new game, we don't even know what gameplay is going to look. So I think it's hard to
we don't
come to
even
that
know what it's
conclusion.
titled.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. It doesn't even have a name yet. So I think, you know, for those of you with pay to win concerns with it being a free to play game, I wouldn't worry about it yet. Just hang tight, watch the news, see how this game develops. And that's another good point there. Digital Extremes is a company that's owned by Alayu Tech, and they obviously make Warframe. And well, you guys don't know this. This is going to be an exclusive for you. Well, I'm currently playing Warframe just to get a feel for the game, get a feel for the monetization in there. And from what everybody's been saying, it's got a fair system. I have to agree because you can earn everything in that store if you play the game, earn the credits, and then buy the blueprints and craft it yourself. And this is crafting weapons and stuff that otherwise your other option is to buy from the in-game store using platinum, which is a premium currency. So you have two ways to do it. And there's high-level weapons in there, and even if you buy it, if you are not at a mastery rank to use that weapon, you can't use it.
Okay.
So it's a pretty fair system. It's a pretty fair system. The entire game is completely free. There's no paywall, whatever. They've got a couple of big updates, Planes of Eidolon being one, and there's a new expansion out this year. And yeah, I think it's pretty fair. So if Athlon Games, and I've seen the comment that a lot of people are saying that, Athlon won't look at digital extremes. I think they will. Warframe is really successful, guys. It's got 38 million players that have tried the game over the course of 5 years. So I would say any free to play game that can bring that sort of attention to it and have really good positive reviews on Steam for a free to play game, I think if you are related to that studio, either by a subsidiary or just being owned by the same parent company, you look at that model and go, we should be inspired by that, not necessarily to copy it, but we should aspire to be liked universally as a free to play game that's fair. And if I mean, I hope Athlon Games are up to it, but that's just my point in that.
Yeah, I'd say at the very least, it seems like that they won't be pressured by the parent company to move towards a model that would be pay to win or something like that. It looks like it will be more on the free to play side as far as what they would be pressuring them to do. Now, whether or not Middle Earth Enterprises or Athlon Games decides to do something else is up to them, I guess. But it at least seems that there won't be that pressure, fear that maybe
Yeah.
certain players for Lotro had when Warner Brothers took over.
Good times. You were there for the Lotro takeover, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this will be a fun discussion to get into later on. But yeah, so again, free to play, guys, don't worry about it yet. And if anything, free to play simply means it's going to be accessible to a lot of players. And the only, you know, tinfoil hat situation that we could probably speculate on is that if this Lord of the Rings game, for whatever reason, doesn't bring in the audience that Middle Earth Enterprises and Athlon Games think it would bring in simply because of the IP, then yeah, they're gonna have to look at how to make money quick to cover their development costs in the first month or 2 months of launch. But other than that, it's still too early to make conclusions.
All right, so next up, I did have this idea for an Ask Me Anything video, and we decided to go ahead and include it in this topic so that it's because it's very much related to the new MMO. So my question for myself, you, GRM Adrian, and the comments down below is, what would be your dream Lord of the Rings MMO? Or in other words, what would your dream Lord of the Rings MMO be like? Which is a loaded question. But I do want to say that obviously any new MMO would have great graphics and things like that. So I feel like that box is already checked off in today's time frame. So beyond graphics and things like that, what are things that you would just love to see in your dream Lord of the Rings MMO?
Ooh, yeah, this was a loaded question, and with questions like these, I usually, tomorrow morning I'll wake up and I'll rethink my answer because
Yep.
there's just so many possibilities. But right now, I'm feeling like a sandbox Lord of the Rings MMO, where
Okay. What would that
players,
look like?
first of all, great graphics, as you say. I think we all want to see, what Mordor looks in high definition, 4K ultra graphics, and all that stuff. From a gameplay perspective, I would just like players to be whoever they want to be within the lore on Middle Earth and live a life. If you want to start a farm in Rohan, just on the outskirts, and create an economy there and enlist into the Rohirrim, and your daily chores are player driven quests, tasks like patrolling the Gap of Rohan, and character progression is not so much in terms of level, but in terms of status and how revered you are within the Rohirrim. And this will be different for all the different factions. You can do the same for Gondor, and in Bree, if you want to play as whoever you want in Hobbiton. How do you want to live your life there? Complete sandbox, complete freedom to a certain extent, and I mean, if your character ages and dies, that'll be great. Kind of like how Chronicles of Illyria does it. So there's a natural start, middle, and end, and what you accomplish in your players or your character's lifetime is always going to be there because you've impacted that world somehow. And I mean, this is just really vague, but that'll be my dream Lord of the Rings MMO. Full exploration, do whatever you want. Yeah, kind of like Star Wars Galaxy was in the past. I mean, that was a great sandbox style game for the Star Wars world. Having that for Lord of the Rings would perfect.
Yeah, I think that would be a great fit for Lord of the Rings, having a sandbox style MMO. And it would be completely different than the existing one. So I think that that would be
Yeah.
really interesting to see. But especially having, like a lot of players are like, oh, there wouldn't be, millions of adventures in
Right.
the Lord of the Rings world. And most people just, stay where they are because it's, a medieval type fantasy.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, that would be cool to see. I think that you could still have really interesting stories just around the areas where those characters are, and
Yep.
there'd be plenty of different characters that you could make that you could really have. Maybe today I just want to be a hobbit in the Shire, or I want to go actually do some adventuring or something like that. It would be really cool.
Yeah. And you can already tell that people are just going to abuse that. They'll take a Hobbit and go troll somebody somewhere else. It's an MMO. Things like these happen,
Yeah.
and but yeah, having a lot of freedom there, just and because from what we've seen in the Lord of the Rings, there's a bigger tendency to role play there because you're giving the tools, you're given the world and everything. So in a sandbox game like that, you don't have to role play. What you're doing is going to be role playing. That's a natural thing instead of having to type in chat or whatever. Your interactions with the world and other players are going to be based on that. So I think that could be pretty interesting.
Yeah, for me, I would like to see something similar to Elder Scrolls Online, but for
Ooh.
Lotro, or for this new Lord of the Rings MMO. I would love to see something in that style, that allows players to go anywhere within the world, do content basically whenever they want. Be able to go through and fully
Yep.
explore every part of it, but also have voiced story.
Hmm.
I would really like to see, and also just allow players a little bit more freedom than they have in the Lord of the Rings Online for what type of character you would play as far as a moral perspective. Because not every character in the Lord of the Rings is a goody two shoes, but I feel like in Lotro you're forced into that role. So
Yeah.
I'd like to see a little bit more gray area, some more player choice, some more things like that, and just allow the players to go anywhere within Middle Earth that they've built out up to that point. Um, I'd also like to see more areas of nothing, where
Mm.
it's just landscape to be the landscape of the world there. Um, and allow fast travel between the different areas that are actually set up with questing and things like that. But I'd like to
Right.
just explore the wilderness and feel like I'm an adventurer just going off into the wild, kind of a thing, similar to the Hobbit type plotline, where you're just going out into this broad open landscape and just having
Right.
fun doing whatever you want to do.
Yeah. That's Yeah, I would actually like that. First and foremost, Lord of the Rings game based on the way that Elder Scrolls allows that sort of freedom for adventure. I agree on the voice acting as well, but you know what that means, right?
What
You
does that mean? Lay it on me.
you're not going to be reading quest text anymore.
Yeah, yeah, I do realize that. There's still the notes that you'll find that'll be not read and things like
Yeah.
that. So there's still plenty of opportunities to be reading things yourselves, but I think it would be much more accessible to not have paragraphs and paragraphs with every single NPC you talk to.
Oh yeah. Oh, you have
Um,
no idea like the few times that I've streamed Lotra on my channel, like the comments I get about that wall of text is just incredible. And
yeah.
for me, I love it. Because you can read it out and we get into character and we read that out. But for other players that maybe haven't really tried like the Lotra or whatever, they look at that wall of text and they go like, What?
And see, part of the reason I think my dream MMO is not doing that is because LOTR already exists.
Hmm.
So I can have, a different experience instead of what's already there kind of a thing. So
So I'm gonna put this out there, and I'm not sure how you feel about this, but Lord of the Rings, whatever MMO, VR.
that'd be pretty great. I would like to see the option to do that. For example, like I think it's Mirror's Edge has a VR option,
Oh,
which is amazing. You're able to be like free running and doing crazy things.
right.
I would like to see there be the full game setup, and then years later they add VR as just an option. If they set it up as a VR game, I wouldn't want to see that.
It has to be an inclusion as well. Like Elder Scrolls, their upcoming games, like Elder Scrolls Blades, the one that's gonna be on mobile, they have a VR option. I mean, Skyrim's already VR. The next Elder Scrolls 6 definitely gonna have a VR option there. With the Lord of the Rings, I get a feeling that a lot of people that love just soaking themselves and spending time in Middle Earth, once you have a VR option for whatever the game is, it's gonna be hard to top that because
Yeah.
if there's one world, I'm not that lucky. I'll probably never go to New Zealand in my lifetime to go see Mata Mata and all these other awesome places. So what's the next best thing? Put on a VR headset and boop, you're there.
Have we
Virtual Middle-earth.
seen a sandbox style game use VR yet?
Uh, Besides, well, I mean, if you consider Skyrim, besides that,
I mean,
no,
especially like what you were describing, that would be really cool to see a game like that be in
yeah.
VR.
What would be awesome is because when with the sandbox thing and when you mix that with Lord of the Rings in Middle Earth, like from a character development perspective and content, I want players to be building their own towns, harvesting materials, setting up outposts, and living that sort of life. And if you can have a VR, if you can integrate VR into that, so you are moving your I don't even know what VRs have, a joystick controller or whatever, just to
Yeah.
get into the world. I think that would be really cool. It's really immersive.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would love to see that.
Yeah, this was a great question. We just totally nerded out there.
Yeah. So
It's
let us
awesome.
know in the comments down below what you think of our ideas and what ideas you have for your dream
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings
What is
MMO.
your ideal Lord of the Rings MMO? And I'm sure there's gonna be one guy in there is like not pay to win. I'm just sure it's for All right, man. So, great question. Thank you. The next one is a question for you, because for those of you that you guys follow my channel, sometime last year you may have watched me make my way through the Lord of the Rings Online's latest expansion, Mordor, and I kind of I finished that and haven't really jumped back into Lord of the Rings since. And Andang he's a serial Lord of the Rings guy, so he's always there, and I can think of no better person or player or content creator to sit down and talk to about LOTR than Andang. So I'm glad he's here. So you already know the topic of the next one. This new Lord of the Rings game, uh, how and will it impact the Lord of the Rings? What do you think?
I can see it going either way. I think honestly, it won't have that much of an impact. The Shadow of War games didn't really have any impact. It might lose players to Lotro. I'm not sure. I think a lot of players, once Mordor happened, are at the very least taking a break and a breather because it's just
Mhm.
such a dark landscape that you kind of need to have that break. It's kind of similar to, after you
Moria,
get out of Moria
yeah,
and you just need a break for a while.
yeah.
And so I think that players will still play Lotro, and it'll still be an MMO that's doing just fine. I feel like, especially considering the fact that this new game is going to be taking place before the events of Lord of the Rings, and Lotro's now starting to answer what goes on in the events after the Lord of the Rings, and so they're
Right.
kind of on opposite ends. And so I think that'll help both of them, is that, it's not like Lotro's 3 years old or something like that. Lotro's been around for a long time.
Long time.
and I think it'll have no problem continuing to be around for a long time. Unless the only exception to this is if players, now that the core story's over, just aren't interested in what LOTRO's doing next, which could happen whether there's a new LOTRO MMO or a new Lord of the Rings MMO or not. So I think LOTRO will still survive or not survive on its own accord, and this new MMO probably won't have much of an impact, I feel like.
Agreed, and I'll chip in here. But first, this question was brought up by Braden Kennett on YouTube in the comments. So thank you, Braden, for this
Yeah,
question.
thanks, Braden.
And yeah, I share that sentiment in terms of how it will impact LOTRO. Really depends on a multitude of factors. As Andang has said, got all these games that have come out in the past under the Lord of the Rings banner, and none of them, as LOTRO players that are Lord of the Rings fans, obviously we would go and check them out. But is it a direct replacement for LOTRO? For those of you that are, if LOTRO is your main MMORPG, will it be a direct replacement? That's down to a couple of factors. What will LOTRO do with their game in terms of quality and improvement in terms of content and quality of life stuff? If they continue to improve, then I think players will be happy. And how well will this new game, if it is even going to be an MMORPG, as we've already talked about, if they do things so well that LOTRO players just, it's a trickle effect, it's a domino effect. If people start going over and yeah, this is definitely a better game than LOTRO, then obviously you will start to see that impact. But until that happens, we can't really say. I was watching this stream, a highlight of this stream from Cordovan, LOTRO's community manager, and he was asked this question: will the new game impact LOTRO at all? And Cordovan said, absolutely not. In terms of how LOTRO will operate and what they will continue to produce, and he actually said this too. They welcome the competition. Standing Stone Games are also interested to see what this game could be, and it's a healthy competition. And just for a reference point, guys, Dungeons and Dragons Online have coexisted with Neverwinter, which is another D&D MMORPG. These two have coexisted for a couple of years now. Not a couple, more than a couple of years, 5 years in fact. So there's two Dungeons and Dragons games out there that are completely fine, and both of them are MMO. So this thing with LOTRO, I see a lot of comments saying that this new game's going to kill LOTRO. I mean, that's a little far-fetched at this point, but the ball right now is in both LOTRO's and this new game's court. How much can LOTRO improve in the future in terms of, yeah, sure, it's not a perfect game. Some people have problems with it. I mean, everybody has their own ideal version of what they expect from LOTRO and where they want it to improve, things like better graphics and a 64-bit client and all this stuff. If they can push that out, in the time before this new game comes out, I think LOTRO will be fine, honestly. So unless things start to take a U-turn, and I do not wish that to happen, and I haven't been jumping back into LOTRO a lot. Like this thing just hit me the other day. A game that I was beta testing and was a founder, Wildstar, that came out in 2014. That's going to be shutting down, and I feel so bad about it because I never went back and played and stuff like that. I never want to feel what I felt for Wildstar with LOTRO. I never want to feel that.
So another thing for Dream MMOs is that whenever the MMO shuts down, that there's still a single player option made available. I would love to see where you could just run your own local version of it even after it shuts down. That would be awesome.
There's just so many legal issues with that, but studios will always.
Here's the way I see it. Let's say that you pay like $20 and you get the game forever from then on. I think that would be a fair trade, and I don't have any idea how setting up a multiplayer game into a single player game would be as far as development goes. But I would imagine it'd be doable, and I think a lot of people would be willing to pay that $20 or whatever to be able to get the final game forever.
I would pay. It's definitely going to have to be more than that, because there's always a risk of them monetizing it after, unless there's a binding contractual thing that they have to sign. And And for me, I'm willing to pay a lot of money for an option for like if Lotro launched, or if they had their lifetime subscription and every lifetime player will get the code for an offline game if the game sunsets, only when the game sunsets, then I would upfront lifetime money. Here you go, take it.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. I'm willing to pay for that. And I think MMOs should start doing that, especially new MMOs that are in development, because with where we are in today in terms of technology, I've been having this discussion with a lot of people that MMORPGs, and this is not doom and gloom stuff or whatever, but with where we are in terms of technology in about 20, 30 years, MMORPGs will slowly fade out, and having that single player game option, would be great to have for the archives, I suppose. So,
Yeah. I think it also
yeah.
depends on just how many updates Lotro continues to have and how many updates this new game has. Because I think players could easily play both if they have the time and if the updates aren't too regular. But
Yeah.
I hope that for the new MMO that the updates are very regular. So it's kind of a trade-off there, I guess.
It yeah, I hope so too, because as a free to play game, and this is just purely out of experience, content update timing and releases, and the period between dry content is always going to be a factor for free to play games. Not everybody can be a Final Fantasy 14 or World of Warcraft, where every so often you'll get a big patch with tons of new content. So with free to play, there's always something's got to give. So I think players have to be patient and wait for that stuff. So I think that's a given, and I just hope that players will understand that, because with all the new MMO launches that I've seen so far, like Bless Online, people never gave that a chance. And to be fair, the studio knew is in their game. I don't think they deserved that second shot, but the game was dead on arrival, and I just don't want this Lord of the Rings game to have that thing where, based on speculation and all these free to play and pay to win stuff, it just nobody gives it a shot. Here's a fun thing. We share a mutual viewer whose name is Brandeth.
Okay, yeah.
And Brandeth was saying, he commented on the news video, said, a day ago I was watching Andang stream. You're leveling your lore master, and you said on stream you were so looking forward to a Lotro 2 because you wanted better graphics. And then the very next day,
It literally happened like the very next day. I was blown away, yeah.
so how long? I'm gonna put you on the spot here, because you're the Lotro guy here on the call. I mean, I play Lotro too, and you can just it's just as easily turn this around. But you're the Lotro guy here. How long do you see Lotro having in terms of lifespan? I'm talking about with the current graphics, current content, and just the direction they're going. Are
I mean,
you? Go ahead.
they could literally keep it going forever as long as they continue to be creative and
Right.
continue to be supported financially. Those are really the two things. As long as they keep being creative enough for people to be interested and people continue to support them in those creative endeavors, I think that it can continue on development forever. Since it's Lord of the Rings and people are willing to, really experience that kind of thing. And people who have stayed around this long, I think, are going to be much harder to pry away from the game than people, say, 5 or 10 years ago.
Gotcha. Okay, I'm gonna pick another question here. This one's from GamerBoy55, who knew that I was going to be talking to you. His question for you is, Andang, you could change. Well, he said one, but I'm adding two more. If you could change three things about Lotro, what would it be? Sorry to
You
put you on the
first,
spot.
GRM Adrian. I'm turning it around.
Okay, you've used that card. Gotcha. First thing I would change is, oh boy, did not prepare for this at all.
Now you see how I feel.
Trait trees, trait trees.
Yeah.
I would go back to the older version of the not having trait trees in a way, but just having a lot more customization with traits, and I know the trait trees were in correlation with just squashing down the skill bloat. And I do admit back then, pre 2012 Riders of Rohan, there was a skill bloat for a lot of classes, with a lot of redundant skills and stuff like that. But for me, the trait trees didn't make classes any more interesting or dynamic like they were in the past, when hybrid classes could be a thing. And that's one thing I would revert, I suppose, if you can consider that a change. So trade trees first. Secondly, let's see. For all you Morse heads out there, PvMP definitely. Instead of putting resources into that Osgiliath map, which I have no idea. I was involved in the PvMP community a lot, and as far as the knowledge of myself and the raids that I was running with on Rittermark and then on Landrel, I think people were asking for a revamp more than a new map, but we got the new map instead of the revamp. So that's something I would, if I could change it, I will go back and try and work PvMP back into a state where it was a viable, well, not well. Yeah, well, it's a viable way to just go and have fun, and it was, people consider that an end game, believe it or not, even though the PvMP crowd's really small and we may be a minority, but we're a passionate group, and to see that slowly fade over the years was kind of painful. So that'll be my second change. And third change, gosh, I just wish Rittermark never shut down. I wish the server shutdowns wasn't a thing, I wish we'd be still having all those 22 servers, was it? And everybody, kept in touch with their friends and everything. And yeah, I just wish we stayed in touch and all that good stuff. It's going sappy. It's going emo. Your fault. Well, it's mine because I brought up the question.
Yeah, you brought up the question here.
Yeah. I've done my 3. Your turn.
So for me, legendary items, I wish that they were there from the start and they level with you, and you're not constantly having to grind through hundreds and hundreds of weapons on your way to level
you're
cap.
You're saying imbuement from the very start?
Imbuement from the very start, day 1 when Moria launched. I feel like that should have been how the system was, and it should have. I feel like that was kind of their initial goal, but then they started realizing that, oh man, to continue this system forward, we're going to have to just keep piling and piling on, to the point where eventually, when they eventually did get to where they changed it over to imbuement, it was long past time, I feel like, just because the system didn't grow. At the time with Moria, it was fine, but when they continued to add on all the extra levels, it just got worse and worse as far as how it progressed. Number 2 would be have a mega server from the start. I know the technology probably wasn't there at the start, but that's what I would like to see, is have that mega server be there, because it just solves so many problems. And if a server ever does need to be shut down, you don't have to worry about it because it's all in the mega server.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that would have solved my number 3. Just not having so many people lose their servers and whatever. A mega server attack would be sweet. Finding groups, pugging for raids, pugging for dungeons, Weatherstock. Everybody could attend Weatherstock, on a mega server. So that would have been great.
And then number 3 is get rid of meaningless side quests, especially after you've already done the exact same meaningless side quests in every single zone leading up to the current zone that you're in.
Oh man,
I'm so tired of killing 10 or 20 enemies again and again, multiple times in each zone, just because a quest tells me to do it. I would much more rather them not have those at all and spend a little bit more time into creating more creative quests, and making those creative quests be longer or have additional creative quests. I would much rather see a lot fewer quests be at a higher quality than have just all these filler quests.
Nail on the head for me, that one, especially with me wrapping up Mordor. That was one of my key things. And sorry to interject here, but I just wanted to bring this up, because my entire experience with Mordor as expansion was, we had a bunch of quests in Mordor. Expansion, there was a ton of quests to go through, and I would say about 60% of them were very much what Andang was kind of describing, filler stuff. In
Yeah.
addition to following your, Black Book of Mordor and the main story arcs leading you from one zone to the other, but the quest designs and the objectives of the quest. And I have to say this: I love Lotro, guys, but we critique the game because we love it. A lot of the quests I kind of get the sense that that it used the same template and design from 2007.
Yeah.
And what I love about MMORPGs as a genre is we try and evolve and change and get creative. And I would have loved to see them implement creative quests, as you said, in this Mordor expansion, just to show players, yep, we're in Mordor now. This is the big bad. This is culmination of over 10 years of work, and we're going to show you guys, we're going to blow your minds with new quests and stuff like that, out of the box stuff. And it's just it's like it never changed. 2007 style of quests, and that just really burned me out real quick.
I do have several more, but I want to include one more. And that's that I would love to see NPCs actually work with me and do things like that and not just be completely useless. So yeah, I would love to see that.
It's a cool one. Alrighty, and that just about wraps up the end of the community stuff, community questions. Thank you guys so much for dropping your comments, or ask you guys in Discord to send some questions across as well, and you guys have done so. So thanks again. And yeah, I guess we should wrap this up. This has been an hour of just great hanging out and nerding out about Lord of the Rings and talking about Lotro. And Andang and we've talked about collaborating for a while, and now that we finally got to do it, pretty awesome, man.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun.
So I guess I'll let you start with any final thoughts you have about the new Lord of the Rings game. Any idea, or when would you like to see this come out? Because MMOs take a very long time to develop. I mean, some of them can go up to like 6 years of development time before we see this. Ideally, when would you like to see this come out?
Yeah, so final thoughts. I think that they need to focus on story. I think that definitely needs to be their focus. As long as they get the story right and just have it be good. I don't care necessarily if it follows the lore too much, but just have a really good story, and I think that'll be just really great. As far as timing goes, I think it should be at least 3 years from now, given the fact that it sounds like they've just made this studio in response to everything Amazon's doing. Now that there's new interest in Lord of the Rings, it's got to be at least 3 years, probably even longer than that, before they'll have anything that would be of a high enough quality for my interest, at least.
Good point. And we were just talking about this before going live here, about this Avalon Games and Middle Earth Enterprise. They may have a really big budget for this game, and usually that's if the bigger the budget, then sometimes the longer it could take, because these companies want to get the quality right and everything. We just take a look at Star Wars: The Old Republic. That game had about $250 million of budget for the game, and that took 5-6 years of development time.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see how that ties in, or if they ever release details like that, how much money is being poured into this Lord of the Rings game. As for me, final thoughts. Excited, just as all of you guys are. Those of you that are Lord of the Rings fans and Lotro players, and we've got a long time more. And in that period, I just hope that from a gameplay standpoint, this is such a buzzword to use. Cutting edge technology, out of unorthodox gameplay and all this stuff. But I really want to see them push the boundaries, because in 2, 3, 4 years time, if that's how long it's going to take, there's so many MMOs on the horizon, stuff like Ashes of Creation coming out, that's really going to raise eyebrows in terms of quality and what they're doing over there. So if this game's going to come out in that sort of period, then it has to be top notch, I suppose, just to stand out and have a really high quality Lord of the Rings game that I think as fans deserve.
Yeah, as long as they focus on ray tracing, assuming ray tracing is still a thing by then, and you get those awesome reflections off of the Hobbit's eyes, I think we'll be in a great spot.
Awesome. All right, so that's it from us. Real quick, I want to say thank you very much to Andang. Thanks so much for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
For those of you on my channel, go check out Andang's channel. He covers Lord of the Rings online. He covers other games as well. And when he streams, it's really fun to be a part of. So YouTube, Andang, and besides YouTube, where else can people find you?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter and a bunch of other places, but if you go to YouTube and look at any video description, I'll have all my links for that. And where can people from my channel find you?
On YouTube primarily, GRM Adrian, and I'm on Twitter as well, but I'm not that much of a social media guy, but I'm at GRM Adrian, and that's about it.
All right, awesome.
So both of you guys on our channels, hit that like button, and don't forget, if you're new, feel free to subscribe to our channels for more MMO content, more LOTR content. We'll both be keeping a very close eye on the development of this new Lord of the Rings game by Avalon Games, and we'll come back in the future and talk about it more. All right, guys, we are out of here. Later.
Take care, everybody.